I started out as an art historian with a focus in Asian languages. And I got out of that because I discovered I couldn't really learn these Asian languages to the sufficient facility that would be necessary for a life of scholarship in all of that. And as a child, my thing was a certain kind of thrill, a certain iridescence that I chased through many different venues. I mean, it began with, well, I don't know what it began with, but you cut into it with fossil collecting, and then butterfly collecting, and then in the proto-phallic phase, rocket manufacture, which occupied me for several very dangerous years, but I was lucky to survive. And I think after rockets came Jackson Pollock, and it was just one thing after another. And when I look at leading ultimately to, for me, psychedelics, which were the quintessence of what I had been seeking in all these other things, in science fiction, in insect collecting, all of these things. It was a kind of edge, a kind of opening into a world that I had really come to believe didn't exist, because I was raised in the Midwest, in western Colorado, in the Sputnik era. If you had talked to me in 1960, I probably wanted to be the world's first Marxist astronautical engineer, or something like that. And so for me, the psychedelic experience was this unexpected encounter with a grail that I had given up on. And I was deep into, existential philosophy and that French writer who lived in prison all his life. I read a lot of writers who never got let out of prison, I remember. It was all very, grim and claustrophobic. And then, I was swept along with the energies of my generation, and I had the good fortune to go to the University of California at Berkeley in the fall of 1965, and it was just like being a little iron particle being drawn into the black hole of the cultural furnace that was forging the metaphors of at least the decade, if not the millennium. And all of these things were there. And I saw then, it was weird. It was a strange disjuncture, because at the same time that I was rejecting then, under the influence of psychedelics and radical politics, rejecting Western values, politics, civilization, I was also, for the first time, having it come within my reach. Because, I came from a town where for excitement people would go down to the 5 and 10 and watch them unpack crates on Saturday nights. I mean, that was the big thing of the week. So, so here then, it's like in the Bob Dylan song, with who is it? With the professors you have discussed, great lawyers and crooks, something like that. And so I got, in the act of passing through the university, a keen sense of Western institutions and the crisis that they were in. And I took that with me to India and Nepal, where I was looking at Buddhist shamanism, and then later to the Amazon. And I discovered, basically, I gave you the punchline last night, that the reality is in this archaic dimension that we have drifted so far from. I don't find it in any of the religious declensions out of that even the ones that have very good public relations, such as yoga, for instance, and stuff like that. I mean, it's thin soup compared to, the 100,000 volt spiritual energy that was flowing in the late Paleolithic. So then there were many adventures and many travelings and a lot of weird knocking around, because it took me a long time to grow up. In fact, I only now got a reasonable shot at it, I think. But I became convinced. I went to the Amazon, searched through Asia, was not satisfied with that spiritual offering, went to the Amazon, and there discovered that these traditions, these dimensions are still being accessed. But the Amazon is caught in a cultural crisis, just like the rest of the planet. You all are extremely over-informed, I'm sure, on the crisis engulfing the world's rainforests. But what is never said along with that is that even if, the World Wildlife Fund and the IMF and all of these people actually get their ducks in a row and save the world's rainforests, they will not save the human ethnomedical information that has been gathered over the past 100,000 years, because that's all oral information and it's not being handed on. People are going off to work in sawmills and wait tables and guide tours, and nobody is picking up on this stuff. And this is not a noble savage rap or some kind of sob sister thing about the nobility of tribal peoples. It's a hard fact that like 85% of the prescription medicines in general medical use today are plant-derived drugs of some sort. I mean, I could say that by destroying this Amazon medical knowledge, we're shooting ourselves in the foot, but it's more serious than that. We're shooting ourselves in the head. So my real world political ambitions boiled down to trying to save that information, and this handout you got this morning is the result of that. We bought land in Hawaii, incorporated as a 501c3, bought more land, and our hobby, and by we I mean my wife Kat and I, she really runs this on a day-to-day basis. We try to save plants with a history of medical importance in tribal culture. And then that's pretty much the goal. Somebody else has to take the ball from there. Homeopaths, drug companies, we're trying not to be judgmental. We just don't want the germplasm of this stuff to fall away. Well, I mention it because that's the physical foundation of all the other ideas that I put out. It's the idea that the most important thing to be preserved is this connection with the plants, connection back into nature. This is what is being stretched to the breaking point, and if sufficiently interrupted, the whole human megasystem will become toxic and go critical. And we have no idea how close we are to the cusp of this event, because it isn't a scenario where things get gradually worse and worse. We're in that scenario. It's that out ahead somewhere there's a drop-off, there's a cusp where the combined effect of all this wrong-headedness takes a sudden quantum leap in its expression. And at that point, it may be irreversible. We don't know how much time we have. And people say to me, well, why psychedelics? Why is that so important? it arises out of my sense of urgency, that there may be a smorgasbord of solutions to the human dilemma if you assume a millennium, and then fewer if you assume 500 years. But I assume less than 50 years, because I think there's just, business as usual in all dimensions, resource extraction, toxification, nuclear proliferation, spread of infectious disease, so forth and so on. Business as usual is the most catastrophic scenario you can imagine. You just have to extrapolate these trends 15 years into the future, and you get a future none of us would want to live in. Well, so I thought then this morning, because of the interest expressed by the group, that we could probably use a discussion about ayahuasca as a kind of a bridge to